Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going deep on a topic that, well, it never really gets old, does it? Justice.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, it's always relevant.
But we're going beyond just, a basic definition here.
Right.
We're going to really try to figure out what it means for us personally,
Mm.
for society, even on like a global scale.
That's a tall order.
Yeah.
But I think we've got a great guide for this journey. Ryan Holiday's Right Thing, Right Now. It's packed with stories and history, real people who grappled with this idea of justice.
I like how Holiday starts with this idea of personal justice.
Yeah.
Almost like it's the foundation.
Absolutely, like building blocks. He talks about the four cardinal virtues: courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, and how they're essential for living a just life.
It makes me think about that quote, justice begins at home.
Oh, it's a good one.
So much of what we consider justice on a larger scale, it really starts with how we act in our own lives.
I think that's what Holiday is getting at with these virtues. They're not just some abstract ideals, they're tools for making good decisions every single day. And he uses some great examples, like President Harry Truman. Most people think of Truman and they go straight to the atomic bomb.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Huge decision, obviously still debated today. But Holiday, he focuses on a different side of Truman. His integrity, even when it was really tough.
Okay, so what kind of stories are we talking about here?
Well, there's this one about how Truman refused to use his political position for personal gain, even when he was struggling financially. And then there's a story about how he honored a debt from a failed business. Even though it meant his family had to make some serious sacrifices, it would have been so easy to just walk away. But for him, it was about doing the right thing, even when it was hard.
That's a really powerful example. It makes you think about how seriously we take the commitments we make, even small ones. How often do we make promises without really thinking about what it means to keep them?
Right. It's so easy to say, I'll do this or I'll be there, but then life gets in the way. And
Yeah, exactly. And Truman's story, it's like a reminder that those seemingly small choices, they really do matter. They build our integrity, which is, like you said, the foundation of personal justice.
that's a great way to put it. Holiday really emphasizes the importance of those daily practices: honesty, loyalty, responsibility. Those are the things that shape our character.
He talks about being an open book, which is a cool phrase.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you have to spill all your secrets, right?
No, not at all.
It's more about being transparent, accountable for your actions, and that builds trust, which is so crucial for any kind of just relationship.
It's like a foundation of fairness. But how do we move from this personal level to making a real impact on society as a whole? That's where things get even more interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. So, Holiday, where does he take us next?
He dives into the idea that big changes, often they start small, with a handful of people who are just fed up with things and decide to do something about it. He uses the example of the 12 men in London who wanted to abolish the slave trade.
Okay, wow. That's a huge goal.
Right. Imagine taking on an entire global industry, something that seemed, at the time, unstoppable.
It takes a lot of courage to even think about something like that.
Hmm.
But it wasn't just passion, was it? They had some really smart strategies, right?
Oh, yeah. Holiday talks about Josiah Wedgwood. He was this famous potter, but he was also an abolitionist. And he created that iconic image, the one with the kneeling slave. Am I not a man and a brother?
Oh, yeah, I've seen that image. So powerful.
Right. It became this symbol of the movement. It forced people to really see the humanity of the people who were being enslaved, not just as commodities, but as, well, men and brothers.
It makes me think about the power of images today. Like with social media, we're bombarded with visuals all the time.
It's true.
Could a single image still have that kind of impact in today's world?
That's a good question. I think there's still something about a really powerful image or story, something that cuts through all the noise and makes you feel something, makes you empathize.
Holiday also mentions Thomas Clarkson, who created those detailed diagrams of slave ships.
Oh, yeah, those were really something.
It wasn't just an abstract idea anymore. It was like, here's the reality of what's happening, the horrific conditions. It reminds us that information, when it's presented the right way, can really be a catalyst for change.
Absolutely. But it usually takes more than just information, right? It takes courage, strategy, a willingness to challenge those in power. Like the fight for women's suffrage. Think about Sojourner Truth. Ain't I a woman? So powerful.
It's incredible to think about the dedication of these women. They were willing to risk everything for the right to vote, something we often take for granted today.
And it was a long fight.
It
You
was.
had Emmeline Pankhurst leading the suffragette movement in Britain. They faced imprisonment, hunger strikes, brutality.
Yeah, it was a really rough time.
Yeah.
But they never gave up.
Their persistence is a reminder that the path to justice, it's rarely smooth.
Definitely not.
But sometimes change can come from within the system itself, like when people in power actually step up and do the right thing, even when it's hard.
Okay, you've got my attention. Give me an example.
So Holiday talks about Floyd Mann. He was a police chief in Alabama during the Civil Rights era.
Okay, that was a really tense time, especially in the South.
It was. The freedom rides were happening, all this violence erupting, and a lot of law enforcement officials, they were either looking the other way or even participating in the violence.
It's hard to imagine being in that situation.
It was a really tough time. But, man, he chose to protect the freedom riders, even when it went against the prevailing attitudes, even when it put his own career and safety at risk.
Wow, that takes a lot of guts. It makes you think about what it means to be just when the law itself is unjust.
It's a really profound question, and that's just the beginning of this whole exploration of justice. We're going to go even deeper, from personal integrity to these bigger ideas of societal and even universal justice. I can't wait to dive in.
Me neither. This is getting really interesting. Okay, so we've talked about personal integrity, about people taking a stand against injustice. Now, you mentioned this idea of universal justice, and I've got to admit, that sounds kind of huge.
It does, right? Like cosmically huge. And that's where Holiday wants to take us, beyond our own actions, even beyond the systems we live in. He's asking, like, how do we expand our sense of justice to include, well, everything?
Okay, so how do we even wrap our heads around that? Where do we start?
He starts with something pretty unexpected, a letter that Albert Einstein wrote.
Einstein.
The physics guy.
The one and only. But this wasn't a physics lecture or anything. It was a letter of condolence to a father who'd lost his son to polio.
Oh, wow. That's gotta be tough.
Incredibly tough. And Einstein, he didn't offer any easy answers or platitudes.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that from him. Instead, he talks about interconnectedness. Like, even when we're facing these huge personal tragedies, we're still part of something much bigger.
It's like, in a way, we're all connected.
Exactly. It's both humbling and kind of amazing, you know? And this idea of interconnectedness, it was really central to the Stoics. They had this concept of the great oneness.
The great oneness. What's that all about?
It's this idea that everything in the universe is linked, kind of like threads in a giant tapestry. And Holiday, he even connects it to what astronauts experience, that overview effect when they see Earth from space.
I've heard astronauts talk about that, how it totally changes their perspective.
Yeah, when you see our planet just floating there, no borders, no divisions, it really hits you that we're all in this together.
So if we really grasp that, how would it change how we think about justice?
That's the question, isn't it? Would we be more compassionate, more likely to act in ways that benefit, well, everyone, not just ourselves?
I mean, it seems like it would have to, right? But it's hard to live with that awareness all the time, you know?
It's definitely a practice of conscious effort. But Holiday, he gives us some incredible examples of what it looks like in action, like the story of Shinzo Kido.
Oh yeah, the equestrian. Wasn't he favored to win gold at the Olympics?
He was, but he made a decision that shocked everyone. He dropped out of the race to protect his horse.
Wow, that's a tough call.
Can you imagine being so close to achieving your dream, but putting your horse's well-being first? It was an act of pure compassion.
It makes you think about how often we prioritize winning, achieving our goals, even if it means pushing others to their limits.
It's a good question to ask ourselves. Are we so focused on the finish line that we forget about the people or even the animals we're running with?
So Kido's story expands our view of justice to include all beings.
Exactly. But Holiday doesn't shy away from the messy parts of human relationships either. He brings us back down to earth with the story of Harvey Milk.
Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official in the U.S., a true pioneer. But his story ends tragically, right?
It does. Assassinated by a former colleague, Dan White. A really heartbreaking story.
And it raises all these questions about justice and forgiveness.
Yeah, like, how do you reconcile the desire for justice with possibility of redemption, even for someone who's committed a terrible act?
Especially when that act was directed at someone who, like Milk, seemed to have so much compassion for everyone, even his opponents.
It's hard to wrap your head around, but Milk truly believed in seeing the good in everyone, even Dan White.
It makes you wonder, Are there limits to forgiveness?
Those are tough questions, and there are no easy answers. But I think Milk's story challenges us to try to look beyond the surface and see the humanity in all of us.
So where do we go from here?
Well, luckily, Holiday doesn't leave us hanging with all these philosophical questions. He shifts gears in the last part of the book, and it gets really exciting.
Okay, tell me more. What does he say?
He moves from the what of justice to the how.
Yeah.
He wants to give us a roadmap for action. He wants us to actually do something with all this knowledge.
Okay, a roadmap for action. I like the sound of that. After all this talk about justice, I'm ready to actually, do something.
And Holiday says the first step is actually pretty simple. Start with yourself. He brings us back to those cardinal virtues: courage, temperance, justice, wisdom, the building blocks we talked about.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Before you go out and try to fix the world, you got to make sure you're living right yourself.
it's so easy to get caught up in blaming other people or systems, but Holiday's saying, look, real change starts with looking inward.
Like, am I being honest? Am I treating people fairly? Am I living according to my values?
Exactly. And once you've done that inner work, then you can start looking outward. How can I make a difference in my community?
So what, like volunteer at a soup kitchen? Donate to a charity?
Sure, those are great. Or maybe it's just being more mindful of how you treat the people around you every day, your family, your coworkers, even the barista who makes your coffee.
It's funny how those small acts of kindness can really add up.
They really can. And Holiday uses this great analogy to illustrate that ripple effect, the coaching tree.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's that about?
He talks about Greg Popovich, the coach of the San Antonio Spurs. Super successful, obviously, but what's really amazing is how many other coaches he's mentored. They've gone on to lead their own teams and impact so many young athletes.
It's like his influence goes way beyond just winning games.
Exactly. It's like planting seeds that grow into something much bigger. And that's something we can all do no matter what our job is. How can we help others succeed? How can we be mentors, create a more just and equitable world where everybody has a chance to thrive?
I'm starting to see how it all connects, the integrity, the courage, the compassion. They build on each other and create this force for good that can really change things.
It's pretty inspiring, right? And you don't have to be in some position of power to make a difference. Holiday talks about how Angela Merkel, before she was Chancellor of Germany, she worked with mentally disabled individuals, used her science background to make a real difference in their lives.
That's cool. It's a good reminder that we can all find ways to serve others no matter what our skills or passions are.
And sometimes it does take people in positions of power to really advocate for those who are marginalized. Holiday reminds us of John Lewis, the civil rights icon, and his idea of good trouble.
Yeah, you got to be willing to shake things up sometimes to challenge injustice even when it's risky.
Exactly. And Lewis, he dedicated his life to that fight. But it's not always about those grand gestures, you know? It's about the everyday choices we make, how we treat each other, the causes we support, the conversations we're willing to have.
Yeah, it's like justice is a process, not a destination.
That's a good way to put it. It's about constantly striving to do the right thing, to live by your values, to create a world where everybody has the chance to flourish.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel really energized, like ready to get out there and make a difference.
That's what I like to hear. So, what small step can you take today in your own life to move yourself, your community, and maybe even the world a little closer to justice?
That's a great question. And it's one we should all be asking ourselves. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of justice. I hope you're feeling inspired to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep working towards a more just and compassionate world.